All right, and it looks like it's actually that time of the day for us to carry on with our webinar. So good afternoon to everybody again. My name is Nelson Santini from Trident Proposal Management. I'll be your host today for this webinar regarding Polaris, specifically the HUBZone and SDVOSB portion of this particular solicitation. So I've already done an audio check, so I'm just going to presume that everybody can still hear me. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, I'll be keeping an eye out on the chat so I can address your questions as we go. And if not, we'll have some time for Q&A towards the end. Just again, not to state the obvious, but this is a presentation geared mostly for the HUBZone and the SDVOSB components, specifically because the small business and the women-owned small business groups are already in the throes of submitting their solicitation, and they're actually just due here in a couple of days. But if you still are in that group and have some questions, I'll be glad to field those again. Today's webinar sponsored by Trident Proposal Management, right? And some key points for everybody to keep in mind today is kind of like taking a look at what are the latest news from the GSA as it relates to Polaris and the GWAC, making sure that we look at the possibility of having some good teammates and how do we select them wisely. What are going to be some of the showstoppers that will prevent you from qualifying under this new segment for the hub zones and for service-disabled veteran corporations? How can we make to a good, quick decision quickly on whether we bid or not? And then the last piece, how do we use a good methodology to make sure that we qualify for the solicitation? Sponsor today is actually Trident Proposal Management. We've been in business, since 2008, and we specialize on everything, from market assessment, capture, proposal management, and aftermarket support, project management, specifically on major solicitations. So if you have any questions, please make sure you visit our site at tridentproposals.com. Again, our 4 major disciplines that we practice are market management, capture management, proposal management and writing, and training and coaching, orals and things like that. Today's session is specifically under the area of capture management, and we're going to be diving in right now. I'm your host. Just to give you some background of information, I'm a former U.S. Naval Submarine Force officer with 25 years of experience in solicitations and procurement for the U.S. government, with over $2 billion in sales on major IDIQs and direct traceable awards. So super happy to be here and sharing some of the knowledge and some of the lessons learned and qualifying in other IDIQs, just like Polaris. In the agenda today, we're going to go anywhere and through the timeline, the scoring, some of the major elements as far as considerations and things to do early on so you can figure out what you need to do in order to qualify for Polaris. Going to touch on the topic of teaming, and then we're going to talk about tools and resources, have a Q&A session, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. So that said, let's move on very quick into the initial update. And so for those that are not aware, the solicitation for the small businesses and for the women-owned small businesses is on track. There was a recently released Q&A session. Questions were answered as late as 2 days ago. And the news is that we're still on track for actually submission on the 19th of August. So if you are a small business or a woman-owned small business, your solicitations are due on the 19th of August. And of course, we're doing this particular session for the SDVOSBs and also the hub zones, and that we expect the solicitation to be released on Q4 of 2022, which means sometime in the month of October or November at the latest, this solicitation is going to be let, and we're going to basically be in the throes of having to submit our responses, which are expected to be submitted on the first calendar quarter of the year 2023. So that's pretty much actually the schedule. Everything seems to be on track. Just as a way of a reminder, and if you've been following Polaris, you know that in the month of May, there was a protest, and that protest delayed the submission process for the woman-owned and small business group. And that was linked to elements related to the JV and teaming agreements and relationships between companies. So we're going to review a little bit of that, which be applicable. And the good news is that we think that those lessons that were learned in the first part of the solicitation are applicable to this next portion of the solicitation on the hub zone and the veteran-owned small businesses. And so it should go a little bit more smoothly and keep on record. For those that are not completely familiar with Polaris, let's just do a quick review because it's always good to level set. It's a GSA-sponsored contract vehicle. It's government-wide. That's where the GWAC comes on in, government-wide acquisition contract. It's going to be for multiple awards over 10 years. So we expect it to be in the format of a 1+4 and then 5 options. So it's about 10 years worth of business. It's a small business set aside. And in this particular case, we're specifically focusing now on the hub zone and the SDVOSBs because that's actually what's the next block that's coming in. It's IT centric, so all things IT, including some stuff that is in a borderline on the Star Trek. So if you look at the requirements, and we'll cover a few of those, there are some options that are specifically on blockchain, augmented reality, and all of the elements of Web 3.0. So some advanced technologies are going to be in here, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. And we don't have a cap, but we expect that about 100 to 200 primes are going to be selected altogether through the contract vehicle. And that's just so that there's diversification of vendors, and also by geographical and or socioeconomical classes, that we have some variation in the way that the award is handled. So key takeaways in big bold letters: it's a GWAC, it's for 10 years, it's an IDIQ, it's going to be a lot of money for IT. And if you have not basically gone through your CMMC and your CAS, strongly advise that you're actually just pulling, and making sure you have your house in order. And again, those are not hard requirements. But as you go through a contract like this, you can expect that, we're going to get into the details of making sure you have your certifications, and you also have your other controlling systems and records and procedures like CAS, so you can actually just basically perform better into the contract vehicle. Some key takeaways in this area is not to underestimate that the government is trying to make sure that they funnel most dollars through single contract vehicles that are just omnibus or larger in size. And that's just so they can actually just number one, track all the money on the budget, utilize it as much as possible, and also give some flexibility to the contracting officers to work with primes so they can actually just put the both solicitations out to fulfill requirements. If you have been following OASIS and other IDIQs that we've been tracking as well, we're noticing that this is a trend that, it's mutually beneficial. You're going to find some grouping of NAICS, or you're going to find some grouping of solicitation dollars. And this is just to, in a backhand way, if you will, to make sure that the cores and the KOs have some flexibility on how they take these dollars and apportion them to make that solicitation faster. These are going to be solicitations that are expected to be in the form of task orders going through this IDIQ that are going to be for some rapid turnaround. So the first double stump that I do over here is that as a 10-year contract, you don't want to actually just miss the boat. And if you're bidding it, you want to make sure that you're set up to actually support that solicitation once you get the award. So knock on wood, you get the award, you want to make sure you have your infrastructure and your team set up to do that, to make sure that you have a good PMO office, that you have some good contracting teams, and so that you're ready also to basically submit these solicitations or responses to these solicitations that are going to come through, because they're expected to be like ATOs, and again, just very quick turnarounds between 5 to 10 working days. So keep that in mind, that it's just not basically just putting all this sweat equity into qualifying. Also going to be a lot of sweat equity going into making sure that you can actually just answer the RFPs for the task orders and contribute to the well-being of the IDIQ. So that's the highest level. Before I go too far, any questions from the room? I think I'm tracking with everybody, but if you have any questions, please make sure you post them on the chat box, right? So moving right along, one of the key things that we're gonna basically tell you is that what we've seen on the first half is basically what we're gonna call it the second half, is that most of your points and the qualification is going to come from past performance. As a matter of fact, it's a very relevant piece of information for you to know that about 70 to 90% of your points are likely going to come from past performance. So you got to make sure you do a solid inventory of what your past performance is, which is going to serve as the evidence to prove to the government that you're a best-in-class company, that you can meet the requirements, and that you can actually just deliver in the contract vehicle. So this is kind of like proving that you deserve a seat at the table, and it's all going to be evidence-based. So we're going to basically just look at from past performance. So it's very important that you start early on, and if you haven't done so, congratulations. As we get into the crazy period here at the end of the fiscal year, you can focus on doing that one. You still have some time to make sure that you begin to look at your past performance and do a contract lineup, right? Make sure you stack and you look at all your past performance that is supportive of the NAICS that are going to be included in the solicitation. Then you can begin to do a down select, right? Look at what are your top projects. Make sure that you can figure out, at the highest level, here's what matters, and here are the ones that are just like the duds. There's going to be some in between. And that's where you're going to use to rack and stack and begin to look at what are the solicitations, past performance, and CPARs that you're going to use to make sure that you can get as many points as possible. So as a reminder, the way that the solicitation works is that you're going to provide evidence, and for the evidence and readiness that you demonstrate on the qualification checklist, you're going to get some points. And based on the points, we already covered, we're going to have somewhere between 100 and 200 seats. The more points you have, the better, your chances are to make sure that you have one of those seats at the table, right? So it's all about scoring the most points. So it's not only making sure that you have relevant experience, is that you have more relevant and compelling experience so you can maximize your points, right? So this is actually just, part of the element. And to do this, right, we have, or the reason we're focusing on this is when we were looking at the solicitation, we realized that within relevant experience and past performance, these are just the biggest blocks in here. And we have them highlighted there in blue for you, just to make sure that we understand what's relevant, and again, on past performance, basically what helps you qualify, through it. So look at all your former solicitations, all of your CPARs, all of the contract that you've been executing on, and make sure that, early on that they are both qualifying past performance and they're directly relevant. So you want them to be compelling, right? So sections 2 and 3, we believe are going to, if it's anything like the previous portion of the solicitation, factually based, it's going to be where you're going to get the most points. Okay. So that said, how do we basically figure out, whether we win or whether we bid or, or not, and what's going to give us biggest chance for us to win is basically just going through a good bid, no bid process. So, we want to make sure that actually when you're putting all of this effort that you're not bidding, if you're not going to win, but that you bid if you have all of the right reasons, right? We want to make sure that you give yourself the highest PWIN by having, again, a good, solid bid strategy. So one of those, we want to avoid the situation where you are actually just having great qualifications, but basically you don't put a good bid strategy together and going forward, right? If you're going to team together, we want to make sure you have a team that makes sense, a team that is actually just going to give you the most points, that it's not going to be overly complex and basically bring questions onto the government, right? We want to make sure that you basically prepare early on, and we're making the point here to talk about claim versus evidence, right? And one of the things that we have noticed as we've been helping other companies prepare for their submission for the small business and the women-owned small business portion is that we want to make sure that we tell the government why we deserve a seat at the table. And that is, again, by showing evidence. There's a big difference between saying we are the best company at this versus we've done A, B, C, and D, and our CPARs are, excellent, excellent, excellent. Therefore, we are proving that we have that evidence, right? So if you have any concerns as you're looking at your past performance and your CPARs, and you want a third party to look at that data, those are part of the services that companies like Trident can do. And we strongly advise you to basically to seek that opinion if you have any areas where you find yourself in a gray area or is questionable, right? The other piece is to make sure that, back to relevance and applicability, making sure that the past performance that you're claiming, it actually is relevant to that NAICS. And so this is one of those areas where perhaps the NAICS by themselves are maybe somewhat misleading. And by that, I mean, you can have a particular NAICS that be exactly in the right category, but the work that you were doing doesn't exactly align perhaps with IT performance. So from that perspective, one of the elements to make sure that you have a good probability of winning is not just going to the NAICS and you having the past performance there, but making sure that the sub elements of your performance as stated in the CPARs or your statement of work are relevant to the discipline that you're approving. So double stomp, one of those really important ones, because this is a little bit of a sleeper that may come back and haunt you, right? Not the least of the reasons, but coming to the end of the line, very important in your PWIN that you're looking at the emerging tech, and again, I cannot overemphasize the fact that the government has made just an incredible wedge in here for emerging technology. So anything from blockchain to augmented reality to biometrics and science like this, it's going to play an incredible role, a big part of your qualification. And these are just areas that are going to be also of high growth. So don't sleep on these solicitations. If you don't have those skill sets within your tool bag, perhaps in a good opportunity to talk about teaming, and we'll mention that later on in the presentation. And the last thing that I would say is, again, a double back on the topic of making sure that you're ready. So you got to make sure that you actually are getting ready to win the solicitation, and make sure that you actually have the right infrastructure so you can get to do the work and respond and be part of the solicitation. The last thing that we would want is for you to qualify, spend all this effort, and then find yourself off-ramped because you're not making the most of the solicitation and helping out yourself and or the contracting vehicle. So as far as evaluating for your PWIN, look at all of these factors and make sure that you have as many direct reasons to bid and that you address those things that give you pause to make sure that this is not a failed effort. Because again, as a 10-year IDIQ that's going to be in the $15+ billion in size, you want to be part of this bus. I'm going to hit the pause button real quick and check with the audience. Just looking to my chat box. I don't see any messages in here, so I'm going to presume that we're doing okay. So looking at some of the tools that we prepared for you, if you go to the website, tridentproposals.com/Polaris, you're going to end up actually just, in a page that basically has some resources that are there for you. If you have not downloaded these already, strongly encourage you to do that. Rebecca and the proposal management team are doing a fantastic job of taking some of this information that's coming from the contracting office and making it in a summary form so you can quickly get to the how do I prepare, do I need to check my check boxes, and making sure you're in good spot to qualify. So we've gone through that trouble for you so that it's a lot easier and you begin to basically organize yourself in the process of preparing for bid. So hit us up at tridentproposals.com/Polaris, easy one to follow, and you will find there some resources like your basic eligibility checklist, which I'm showing here. And it's pretty much of this particular form, right, that will quickly tell you if you basically pass, it's just like a go, no go test, almost like a bid, no bid. Please go ahead and download this and complete it. You'll find it through the URL at the bottom. And the last piece is making sure that you begin to organize your relevant experience checklist. Again, the points form that comes from the solicitation, once it's let out, we expect it to be very much identical to the one that has been set and let already for the small business and the women-owned small business group. We have a quick checklist in here just to help you with that. You can find it at the same resource of Polaris, /Polaris on the tridentproposals.com domain. So make the use of these forms. If you have any questions on those, again, you can help, hit us up at, info@tridentproposals.com, marketing@tridentproposals.com, and we'll be glad to actually follow up and help you if you have any specific questions about the forms. Okay. So very straightforward, you have choices, right? And so we know that it's going to be a major contract. We know that it's going to be very much math oriented. So it's going to be like very factual, not a lot of fluff. As a matter of fact, if you're looking at former solicitations, this is not your typical 3-volume, lots of paper and just like telling a big story. This is going to be like very much a meat and potatoes, entering information into the computer system so you can validate that you are actually a good candidate to make this particular bid. So you have a few options here, which is no bid. If you go through the tools that we're giving you and you see that you're not even scratching the surface on points, maybe something for you to think about. But before you say, I'm not going to bid, then the options are, hey, do I build a team or do I become part of the team? And I will tell you right now that if you're interested, I have a couple of HUBZone companies that are interested in teaming up because they have gone through this exercise already and they realize they don't have enough points, but they're a HUBZone. They're a small veteran company, owned company, and so they're looking for partners. So as part of our service, we're making sure that we're doing a little bit of matchmaking for you. If you're interested, please make sure that you hit me up at nelson@tridentproposals.com, and we'll make sure that we basically following and observing the privacy that the solicitation requires to make sure we protect your strategy, that we can actually just put you in contact with the right people and help you in doing some of this teaming. But the options are very straightforward. I can go Lone Ranger if I have all of the points in the world. I can actually just basically shore up my points if I basically team up or form a joint venture, or I can decide altogether not to bid and basically just have a different strategy for me to sell IT for the next 10 years for the government. And I'm not saying that facetiously. I'm just saying that those are kind of like the options. So glad to help you with that. Again, the forms you can find for qualification on tridentproposals.com/Polaris, and any questions, again, directed to myself at nelson@tridentproposals.com. Now, if you're going to team up, then there's a couple of things, for you to think through. And I've gone through the trouble of putting these slides together. I'm not going to go through all gory detail on all of the slides, but they're going to be there for you to download the presentation and have them readily accessible. And so you can actually just go through when it comes down to shoring up your scoring matrix through establishing and following a joint venture and a teaming agreement with other companies, so you can have a prime sub relationship and bid like that as well. So a couple of things at the highest level, if you're looking at a joint venture, it's basically a concern. It's a third party entity that is formed together, that it has to be on 51%, or basically being controlled by one of the small businesses within the group. Okay. And so you can actually just use this in accordance with the solicitation from GSA. The past performance of all of the members of this joint venture actually just help you and to score points towards a qualification. So this was one of the areas that basically caused the most pain, if you will, in when the solicitation was let out, because some small businesses basically thought that, or their opinion was that this was going to create an imbalanced environment as far as having multiple large companies be part of the jump on the bandwagon, if you will, on the solicitation and pretty much use small businesses as a front. And so the solicitation and the government has gone through great lengths in making sure that when you enter into a joint venture relationship, that the controlling party and the hooks and balances, if you are in the favor of the small business to actually just be in a place where they can grow and actually just be a benefit, for their performance. And so the message here is that there's a lot of legal elements that have to be met for you to form a joint venture, and that takes some time. And even in the ideal world, when everybody's truly motivated, it's going to take some time for you to basically work with your counsel, work with your attorneys and make sure that everything is formed, because it has to be a legal entity. So the double stump on the floor here is joint venture is still an option. It works. There's room for it. And the government has gone out of their way to make sure that you can actually just bid as a joint venture, but it takes some time. So with a solicitation that's going to come out here just after the end of the fiscal year, sometime in middle of October and November, you got to start early on. So double stump on the floor. If you're thinking about a JV, this will be the time to start to do that. Don't let it happen that you basically get distracted by the end of the fiscal year and find yourself in October coming up for it and realizing, who do I team up with? Probably going to be a tough strategy. Again, I'll have the definitions in here. I'll have the arrangements for you to actually use as a reference and to basically follow through. I tell you that this is actually just important too, and the difference between a joint venture and the benefits between a joint venture and teaming agreements. Again, it's all about the flexibility and how you want to structure that relationship. And I have a summary slide to go over it. But again, in the teaming agreement, the one thing that I will comment, and it's basically summarized in this particular slide, is that because it is a teaming agreement, you are likely to have to negotiate at the task order level when the jobs are being led. And so it gives you some flexibility. It also, practically speaking, it creates a little bit of administrative burden. I've been part both as a sub and as a prime in these agreements. And so it does require a little bit of elbow grease and jockeying around, if you will, at the task order level when those are laid out. So it's not that it's bad or worse or better. It's just that it's different. And it all depends on how you actually organize your team on how that's going to work out for you. So if a joint venture is perhaps too complex and just too difficult to do, a teaming agreement or basically finding a sub to actually basically shore up your company, or conversely becoming a sub to somebody else within the socioeconomical category, right? It's something that you may want to consider, but it does take some work at the task order level. So either way, there's going to be some elbow greasing. So a little bit of work up front on the JV, easier to handle on the back. On the teaming agreement, a little bit easier on the front, requires a little bit more work, on the back end. But all the same, basically, you can actually just move on forward and grow the company, which is the goal of all these solicitations. On the summary slide, and again, I leave you this in the presentation so you can take a look at it. From the standpoint of the biggest differences, right, as far as the joint venture versus the teaming, slightly different beast. Both will help you to qualify. I will share this with you, which is on the joint venture. One of the key things is that you can actually just partake and share on the past performance, right? So once you do the work, because you're part of the joint venture, you're going to qualify to take those C parts and that past performance with you. So if you are into other solicitations, if you have plans of becoming a prime, and if your aspirations are to grow your company, probably not a bad thing to kind of look at what the joint venture has to do. Again, a lot of heavy lifting up front, but will help you actually just meeting your goals and graduating from the small business status later on, and take that past performance with you. If you're on a teaming agreement, right, the one drawback that I would like to highlight there is the fact that, easy on the front, a little bit of elbow grease, but one of the key hooks is the fact that the past performance goes basically to the prime. So if you're not the prime and the CPAR is filed, then it's a lot more difficult for you to claim that particular CPARs later on as experience of performance. and to justify actually just yourself into other solicitations. So bonuses, and differences, between both of these particular entities, they'll get you to the job, but the key thing is you got to start basically thinking about this early on. You have the time right now and prepare, and consult, and discuss what's going to be my long-term strategy as far as how do I approach the contract vehicle. So joint ventures and teaming agreements, we'll have that information there for you. Please take a look through it, read it, and as you have questions, glad to engage and help you work on what the strategy ought to be, or at least discuss, do some troubleshooting on figuring out, what would be the best approach. Glad to basically just have those discussions with you. And the reason that we are happy to do that is because we do have actually just a process that we have used to go through this particular scenario. So as you can see here, one of the things that we talked about is actually the methodology that we follow, and having done IDIQs and other contract vehicles like task orders and single awards, we've found that, the steps that you see here on the table and on the slide are kind of like very, very much straightforward. And if you follow this particular discipline, it will help you actually just do a better job in the solicitation. So anything from beginning to find out if you're eligible to bid, all the way to making sure that you identify your gap analysis, to all the way through making sure that your submission is compelling, and then after award to make sure you can make the most of it. This is methodology that we want to present so that you can think through this Polaris bid, not just as far as submitting the solicitation, but all of the things that you need to do to make sure that you are basically making the most of your investment in this particular contract vehicle, get the solicitation award, and then make the most of it. So we're putting these slides on the deck for you to think through that methodology. If you want to discuss it, great, to have that conversation with you. And as well to remind you that as a proposal house, these are services that Trident provides all the way from the early qualification market research all the way through the PM support and PMO office in the end. So you'll have access to this particular process. You can download this also from the website at tridentproposals.com. It's available for you in its full form and manual for called Fast Prop. So you can actually just have access to it. And then, the particular details will be readily available. So please feel free to go to tridentproposals.com/Fast Prop, and you will find it there. If you look at the navigation, you will also find it that you can just download it. It's for free, and it's there for you to actually just, be ready for this solicitation and for others as well. And, hopefully for the award that will follow, your qualification into Polaris. So again, if you want to have also some other examples on ideas on how the solicitation is going to go and how other companies are bidding, general information and lessons that we've learned, take a look at our blog. Right. And you can hit it up at tridentproposals.com/blog. And if you want to hit the tab with Polaris, you'll get an automatic filter that will basically show you the articles for Polaris. If you just go to the general blog and basically click on the filter for Polaris, you will also have access to the same information. But a lot of good information in there that we've learned, having helped several companies go through the process, putting on the packages for Polaris that will be applicable as well for the HUBZone and for the SDVOSBs to actually just participate. And so our last thing, as a reminder, we offer support, for you to actually just go through this qualification. And so if you want a third-party compliance check and people like a third party to come back and tell you based on the evidence that you have, what are your chances of qualifying, we have a third-party compliance package that's applicable and ready for us to basically help you go through that process. And those dollars would go and contribute towards the done for you proposal support, which is where we do the white glove. So we have a couple of options where we can help you. Make sure that you actually just have a stopgap if you want to see if you're qualified to bid, what your chances are, and how we would basically help you basically address those gaps so you're in a good spot to do that. And if you're short on resources, we can also basically help you go through the white glove and do the complete service for you. Meaning that our team will basically just work with you. We'll have a project manager assigned to your company, and we will help you to make sure that we go through the complete process of qualification and also optimize your response so you can get as much points as possible to basically just qualify in Polaris. I think that is actually my last slide. I'm looking at time and I'm coming into time, minute 32. Gonna take a quick break here on the camera before it resets itself. And I'm going to come back to answer any questions. So just the room over here, just reaching out to anybody. So Deborah, Kim, Luz, any questions I may have from the audience, looking at the board over here, any particular questions, thoughts, and things that I may address. All right. I see no questions. I see no alibis. All right. Nobody typing. So great. Well, listen, I just wanted to let you know, thanks a lot for taking the time to spend this afternoon with me to talk about Polaris. As a reminder, this presentation will be available on our website. Again, all you have to do is go to tridentproposals.com/Polaris. And if you follow the little tags in the page, you'll be able to get your hand on this presentation. Also, you'll have access to the forms and the self-help tools that we have, including also the fast proposal guide, which is also available for you. And you will also have the links to the YouTube channel in case you want to listen to the presentation one more time and basically listen to a few things that I may have said that may be of interest to you. So with that said, I have nothing else, other than to wish you a happy Wednesday. Make sure that you actually just make the day productive. And if you have any questions, again, you can hit me up at nelson@tridentproposals.com. One last time, no alibis. If there are no questions, thank you so much for your time today and hope to see you at the next webinar.